Hello everyone. So in this video we will be doing a part 2 to the how to improve at T9A video I did a couple, I don't know, months ago at this point. I don't even know how far along ago. So if you haven't seen that, go check that out. So, in that video we talked about different skills of playing, whether it's list building, deployment, rules knowledge, reflection, just experience. Um, and for more detail on that, go there. And recently, I've been playing, I've been going to tournaments and stuff, and I've been trying to identify weak points in my game, but not only identify weak points, because in my last video I talked about I didn't think I was very good at deployment compared to some other things, but also, how to get better. I think that is something um, that is almost as hard, if not harder, than identifying what you do wrong, right? It's one thing to say, oh, I'm bad because I don't do this well. Well, the next question would be, assuming you want to get better at it, is, well, how do you get better at it? How do you improve upon it? And what steps can you take um, to whatever, get better? It sounds stupid, but that's what the video is about. So this video was actually brought about because of my own reflection on things that I felt I didn't do well, or things that I could improve upon that I noticed when I was playing my games and reflecting upon them. Outside of saying, "Oh, I don't deploy well," right, or I don't have as great of a strategy. You know, what was causing me to fail or not improve in these aspects, right? It's one, like I said, it's one thing to identify that you're not good at something. It's another thing to actually work to get better at it. So this second one, it's a part two. It's semi focused on things that I think about personally, but I added a few that I thought that I was good at that I think can help other people. So it's kind of like it's gonna be an extension of the last video, but at the same time, it also is probably gonna repeat some of itself because it was a little more inner reflective, and I just wanted to share it and make it into this type of video. So, um, this is the slide. This is the only slide. And I'm trying to see how I can actually just share the slide or put it into big view. Maybe I'm just not going to. I'll just leave it like this because I don't want to mess with it. So I picked these four categories somewhat because I either do them or I don't do them well. In fact, two of them I do well and two of them I don't do well. Maybe you can guess which ones you think I am good at, which ones I'm not good at. Actually, it's a mix of both between them now that I'm reading my slide again. Um, and I think some of it is also I'd like to tell people, some things I notice at tournaments that I don't like, and I just want to talk about it. So the easy one, the first one, enjoy the game. And so I think we all play this game, hopefully because we enjoy it. Without GW being part of it and being a fan made game, I think you really do have to enjoy the game to some extent to keep playing it and keep supporting the project. And so, I think just playing games, watching games, and talking to other players is a great way to improve. I mean, from my own standpoint, like, to be honest, I came back to the game, what, 2 or 3 years ago at this point. The first thing I did was harass the good players that I used to know when I used to play and ask them for advice and ask them why they do things and ask them about their lists. In fact, Rince, the Polish ETC player, he would coach me. I think we had a couple coaching sessions for a couple hours, probably 4 or 5, where we would just sit on Skype and talk about Warriors and the game and stuff and matchups, just share insight back when I didn't know as much. Thomas, I harass him all the time. And don't I'm not afraid even now when I'm watching games or running the tournaments. I'll poke a player on Discord and say, "Hey, well, how'd that game?" I was watching a game and say, "Why did you do this?" Or just shit talk them. But at the same time that I'm shit talking or just shooting the shit with them, I'm trying to absorb why they do things, why did they take things, what do they think about it, because you know one of the things that we're going to suggest is practice, right? You need to practice. Practice makes perfect, but you can kind of get a little bit of practice from talking to other players. When I was playing Orcs a lot, there were several players. Kaiser, the Polish Orc guy, the French one. Sorry, I don't have all the names in front of me right away. And I would just speak to them about like, why did they play this in orcs? Did they like it? Did they not? And I would use my experience with models and combine with their experience with models. And sometimes it would coincide, and sometimes that's really nice when you have two data points. Like you see it and somebody else sees it, and then maybe that even reinforces the fact that you were right or something is good or maybe not as good as you thought. Or, you think something isn't good and they think it is good. And when they explain to you why, maybe it's because the way you play the game, you're not a fan of that kind of style. Maybe you weren't using it how they were using it, and then you're like, oh, I could see if I used it that way, how it would be useful. Maybe you use something as a Swiss, some people just use it as an anvil. Like they just throw it out there and be like, just kill it. It's a distraction. And maybe I'm more careful with it, but the way I play it, like being careful with it doesn't really get the most out of it. So I think talking with other players, watching games, playing games, and they don't have to all be top players. I mean, you're probably not going to get the greatest opinions from the weakest players, but even from just high end or people who play against good players, it's good just to hear why they like things and why they don't. And maybe you won't always agree. And I'm not one to really fight too much on everybody's opinions on things. I do try to see the good in lists, and sometimes it just doesn't show through in play. But I think that's an easy one. I think we all do that pretty well. And I think you can always do it more. Like, I think to be a top player, playing with other people or talking to other people and playing diverse people is always going to be a part to expand. And so I'm going to actually move over to the rules knowledge one, because the rules knowledge one is one I emphasized in my last video about knowing the rules. And I think at the table, there's a little bit more than just knowing the rules. Because I think there's people who know the rules, and then when you get to the table and you're actually playing the game, there's taking it to another level. And so be assertive is probably my biggest thing. And I have people, whether it's in the tournament or just talking to me about games, where they say, oh, my opponent, played something wrong, and I thought, whether they thought it was wrong or not, and they're not like assertive about like, this is how it's played. And the more rules knowledge you have, the easier it is to be assertive about it. But, I think a lot of people get cheated in games or cheat themselves, maybe accidentally. But I think a lot of people let people get away with things until it's too late. And then they want to complain about it afterwards. And in my head, it's pretty much your fault. And I'll say this lightly, or it's not lightly. I'm going to say it pretty bluntly. If you get cheated by a rule, it is your fault in some capacity. You do not, you can't control everybody you're playing. You can assume that they're all not doing it on purpose or whatnot. But at some point, all the information is in front of you, right? Unless they're physically cheating with like rolling dice and you can't see it, even though I pay attention to dice very closely, or measuring things and cheating you on measurements, though you can kind of check them on things if it looks ridiculous, or make sure ahead of time that something isn't possible, which is also a good thing to do. You have the ability to know their stats. You have the books. There's no secrets. You can see what they need to do and whether they're playing it right or not. You know if something's possible. So if somebody does something to you, and if you come back afterwards and like, oh, they removed this model in the wrong way, it's kind of your fault, like, as well. Like, you could easily have known the rule, told them they're wrong, and unless they're physically arguing with you and won't judge, the judge won't, there's no judge or something, you could change it and make it right. So being assertive and being, willing to, I don't even think argue. I call people on rules, people call me on things, and people get things wrong, for sure. But I think being assertive and knowing the rules and actually saying, hey, that's not how it works, is important to be good at the games. You can't let people walk all over you. That's a big thing. I think some of these players, top players, I think people allow them to walk all over them for whatever reason. And they get away with tons of shit. Whether they're cheating or playing things wrong, let's say it that way. Playing things wrong intentionally or not. Whether they just don't know. Because I firmly I've seen enough games that people don't know all the rules, even the best players. And then people want to complain about it, and so the aura of some of these players that they're always right. In fact, a lot of them don't know the rules very well. So one thing you can do to kind of protect yourself against them is, one, to not take shit from them if you think you're right, and two, to know the rules well enough that you can call them on it. Don't come crying afterwards that they played something wrong and you didn't know it either, right? Because I'm sure you as yourself played things wrong as well. Take responsibility. That's the whole take responsibility for your own rules knowledge, and then play with integrity. This one kind of, it bugs me because I see it a lot at tournaments and online or whatnot, more in person sometimes. But you know, I don't give people tactical advice for the most part when I play. That's stupid, right? Why play against myself? But what I do is if somebody rolls 3 attacks and I know they have 4, I tell them 99% of the time. If it's like they rolled 20 dice and they should have rolled 21, I'm not going to maybe go out of my way if it's like something stupid. But, if somebody, they think their chariot crew has 2 attacks and I say, oh no, you have 4, roll it. Roll 4 dice, because you should be planning in your strategy for people to know their rules, and like you shouldn't base a strategy on them rolling like not enough dice or not knowing what the hit is, right? So that kind of comes with the whole other side of it, right? The reason I look at dice or I narrate games a lot, so when I'm playing and my opponent's shooting, okay, you need 5s and 6s. I say it because it lets them know that I know what they need to roll and I'm watching them. And maybe they have a different idea and they say, oh, why don't I need 4s, or why don't I need this? Then it's on me to either prove it, and sometimes I'm wrong. I've been wrong about, I'm not in cover or whatever. But at the same time, I've also helped people in that way. And I think that's fine. I'm trying to catch the people trying to cheat me. I'm trying to catch the people, I'm trying to make sure people don't cheat me and roll with a different strength than I think it is, or roll with a different amount of attacks than I think it is. But at the same time, I think in doing that, you need to have the integrity for the other side of it, where somebody plays it wrong to their detriment, you should be willing to say something. If it's like a basic stat, like, right, if it's like, they rolled 3 attacks instead of 4. I do think people are oblivious to this sometimes, or they don't care, or they let people play it wrong. I've seen that a little bit more than I'd like to, especially with good players versus weak players. I have stories that I've heard of players playing something wrong, being told they played it wrong, being shown that it's wrong, and then doing it again the next game. And that bugs me a lot. Like that internal integrity. And listen, I'm not perfect. I've not always been perfect. But I'd like to say that for the most part, I do try to help people. I mean, probably the one thing I do I shouldn't do is, like, if somebody casts, this happened, so if Subtle's listening, he cast Break the Spirit on my flares, and I told him right before he cast, I'm like, I'm Strider, so it's not going to work other than the -1 to hit, and then he cast on something else. And those kind of things maybe, or the big one I do, I guess, is I tell people that Chaos Champions have 2 wounds because they're like about to put an attack on it, and I should just let them attack it and be like, I have 2. And that's their fault for quote-unquote wasting an attack. But I do tend to tell them that. And maybe I shouldn't. But anyway, that's kind of my argument on the rules side. But I do feel like you need to, it's on you. Take responsibility and get better at it, and be assertive and watch the game. I don't drink when I play. I focus on the game. I really enjoy that part of the game. I like being focused in. So maybe it just comes more naturally to be like staring at your opponent's dice and all this stuff. But I don't know. That's all I can say about that. Don't come complain to me if you weren't. If they got something wrong, you could have told them, right? Even their army rules. And so now I'm getting to the ones that I think really hit home for me about what I don't do, how I would like to improve my game that is not just get better at deployment, right? Like, how do you get better at deployment? So the first one I'm going to do is slow it down. And there's two aspects to this. There's actual speed of how you play, and then there's how you tactically play. And I'm actually going to start with the second bullet point, which is think through move. So in this tournament I just went to, finished every game with more than enough time on the clock, maybe 30, at least 45 minutes probably. But I did noticeably take my time and deploy much slower, knowing that I am quicker at other parts of the game. But what I didn't like that I saw was, and this happens a lot, is if I'm winning or if I think things are going really well or decently, I tend to rush charge phases. I'll say the big one is charge phases. Like I charge and I just go to move my models in and things are going well and I'm like, oh, I'm crushing it. And then you look and you're like, man, something, I'll give you an example. I wish I'd put my unit within 1 inch of this other unit so that when I reformed, I didn't have to obey the 1 inch rule. Or, oh, I wish I had contacted just here instead of here because I need to be within range for this spell. So that happens a lot to me where I charge things and I just put my model in and it's really not a huge deal. Like maybe you think you're going to blow through a combat and you don't. And you're like, man, I wish I was just slightly more up in case he held so that I could reform like this and do something special. Especially the cases where you think something's going to go one way, whether they're going to break or whether they're going to hold or something, and you don't plan for the contingency of them doing the opposite. And I think it depends on if the contingency, sometimes there's no downside, right? Sometimes you got to do it one way hoping it breaks for X reason, and if they fail, another reason. But sometimes you can do both. You can cover both bases with one move, and if you don't take the time to think about it, then you can be screwed or not as good. Usually these are small margin things. For example, there was a game I played where I crushed a combat, and I'm like, oh, this is going well. And then I thought about it afterwards. I didn't combat reform or anything. And I thought about it afterwards. I'm like, I probably could have did a combat reform to whether it's limiting enemy models that can come in, whether it's making the overruns farther, whether it's switching places of models so that when you get countercharged or countercharging models that you don't care as much about. Like there's a lot of things like that where I'm just like, man, I'm just thinking about it now and I'm like, geez, I could have done that a lot better. And it ended up working out. But I tend to think about those, and the thing is, they come to me. It's not like I'm sitting there for hours after the game being like, oh my God, I should have did that move. It's like literally like in the movement phase where I'm like, fuck, why didn't I just reform better? Or why didn't I just move this unit into this spot better? So that's what I say, slow it down, think through your moves, especially like things like champ placements, overruns, reforms, all this stuff. I do want to slow it down and really get, focus on those things. And I think this comes with practice. So I think one reason slowing it down works is you should slow it down to get faster in the end, right? If you don't slow down and think through some of these situations, you're not going to improve about getting faster at it or getting better at it, right? So similar to chess or other games, you have to get good about thinking through situations and seeing patterns, and then take it slow, because if you do it fast, you're just going to mess it up and you'll never get better. But if you take the time to really think it out, then as you do that, you'll get faster and faster at seeing these things and making those decisions to the point that you can play at a good speed. Now, what I don't think is that Warhammer should be played in 8 hours at a time. I think there is a skill in being faster at the game. And so I think it's on you to use your time wisely, and when use your time to think when it's really important, and don't be slow at stupid things like rolling dice. People who are slow at rolling dice just annoy me. So one thing I really want to do, and I wrote this down like right after the tournament, I said I need to slow it down, and I'm so fast. I'm finishing games 45 minutes ahead of time. I really need to say, all right, let me think through this charge phase, and when I move my 4 chargers, let me really think about where they're going to go and what's the best place for them to go. Because once the movement is the biggest part of the game. Casting spells is pretty, you kind of know what you're going to do. and stuff like that. And maybe some of it comes that I have an army that's really fast and single models, and I don't have shooting that I can play faster. But I don't know. That's just something I wanted to point out. The other slow it down would be it's a 6-turn game. And what I mean by that is you have time for the game to develop. So I played Malifaux before I came back to the Ninth Age. And anyone who's played Malifaux knows it's a much different mechanic of a game. It's activation based. It's one after the, I go, you go, I go, you go. And each model can only do a certain number of activations. And so activations involve moving, attacking, stuff like that. So in theory, if you really broke it down in that game, it was only a 5-turn game. A model that has 2 activation of turns only can do 10 things. So there's a very limited amount of things it can do. So at some point, if you're not moving, you don't get that back, or you can't make that up. And that's similar in Warhammer. You can't really make it up. If you start on the back of the board and don't move for 3 turns, you're not going to make it to the middle in time. But at the same time, in Warhammer, you can do multiple things in a turn. You can charge, you can attack, you can overrun, you can attack again, you can set up for next turn. While in Malifaux, it's like you only get one attack in your you know what I mean. You go and you attack, and then you're out of activations. So I think Malifaux was a much faster game. Things happened on the first turn much more. It was a skirmish game, and I think it became about controlling your activations and using them efficiently, as opposed to maybe Warhammer, where there's games where it's turn 4 and I'm like, oh, this game's over one way or the other. Like, things have already happened, and I think to myself, should I have just waited one more turn, got into a better position, and then crushed him? Because there's no rush. You can score 2,000-3,000 points, if not more, in 2 turns, if you position right and then crush them on turn 5 and 6, right? So there are times, whether you're taking long charges or I complain about people chaffing early, and for no reason. Like, they throw dogs in front of somebody and it doesn't do anything. Like, it had no purpose. I'm not gonna say I don't. I'm not gonna say I do that necessarily, but at some point, like, there's times where I chaff turn 1. Let's say I throw my flares across the board, and I move my Feldrake Elder as fast as he can, which is 16 inches. So technically, I'm 8 inches away from them, but I'm probably a little bit less because you're going diagonals, and maybe you don't want to get hit by an overrun or something. So maybe you're like 12 inches out, and then they just move their unit backwards. I'm like, oh, my charge went from a 6 to a 10, and you're just like, shit, why did I? And then you kind of waste your chaff because they kill it with something else. And you kind of sit there and you're like, could I have waited another turn to get into an even better position? And especially with single models, you have time to like get around people's flanks. If you just throw a 500-point monster into like a 500-point ogre unit, sometimes, this is not all the time, sometimes the ogres just win because they have so much more wounds, or infantry, monstrous infantry. And you're paying for some of the speed of a single model, so why not use it? So I do want to get better about saying it's a 6-turn game. Play some grab ass, get better positioning, jockey for position, and then take the game. Maybe, yeah, I don't know what else to say other than slowing it down. So I think those are 2 aspects that I'm really working on. Both, one is a strategy of slowing it down, and one is actually a physical slowing it down and thinking through things. Because like I said, it's not like it's 3 hours later that I'm finding these great plays. It's literally like right after, when I'm in the remaining moves phase, and I'm just like, fuck, why didn't I do that? And so the last one is probably my biggest one, is don't be afraid to fail. And what I mean is, I'm not going to act like I have some huge anxiety, but I don't know if you ever heard of like queue anxiety, or queuing up anxiety, or StarCraft, whatever it's called, anxiety. Like the anxiety, like you don't even want to press matchmaking because you're so anxious and nervous about the game ahead that you don't even want to queue up for a game. And I feel like I have this in Ninth Age a decent bit. Like there's times where I wake up on a weekend. I'm like, oh, I want to play a game today. And then I start looking for who I want to play. And I'm like, do I really want to play this person? And then, or do I really want to play? And then I'm like thinking about bad matchups and stuff. And I'm like, and I end up not playing. Because I'm almost like afraid to lose for no reason at all. Like there's no reason other than personal pride or people watching or whatever that you should really give a shit if you lose a game of like practice. Even online tournaments, like in the beginning, like when I did the Ocho with our team, we were really like upset that we lost and we were playing on the top table, blah blah blah. And now when all my teams, I'm just like, even though my teams are pretty good, it's not like I take noobs all the time. But it's like whatever, you lose, you lose. You move on to the next game, you have fun playing. And so this is something that I really admire Thomas for, who I talk about all the time, is that he just plays games. He just enjoys the game and he just plays. And yes, he's really good and yes, he usually wins, but he just plays the game. Whatever, just play and practice. Like there's nothing that beats practicing the game as for, to get better. And so I wish I had more of a. And the thing for me is, it's when I'm playing the game. Once I get going and I'm talking to my opponent, having fun, we deployed, rolling dice, things die. I'm pretty chill. Like shit happens. Like it's not like I sit there and I'm after the game like my blood is boiling and I'm so angry and it just makes me upset. Kind of like I don't know if anyone's ever played League of Legends, but League of Legends for me got to the point where winning the game wasn't nearly as a high as losing made me feel. Like losing a game of League of Legends was so like annoying, or like whatever for whatever reason, shitty teammates, whatever, you played bad, that it just that the downside of playing was way worse than any of the upside was, and that's not the same for Ninth Age for me. I enjoy playing, and I've had things go bad while I'm playing, and you kind of just fucking go, all right. It's that getting over the hurdle and like getting the game going that's hard for me, and I need to really get over that and just play more and ask people to play. Um, I think I said ignore dice. I think I'm pretty good about that personally, and I think you have to be good at it while playing the game and when assessing your game. We talked about in the last video not blaming dice and looking for ways to improve. But I really do think while you're playing the game, you just have to kind of go shit and like this sucks, right? Oh, I didn't dispel your 5 on 2 dice, which is not actually that crazy of odds. And just say, all right, you can't let. There's nothing you can do. Getting angry at your dice doesn't do anything but potentially make you make a mistake later on in the game. That's all it can do. There's nothing. You just roll the dice and you fail the check and you move your units. Like what? I don't know what else to tell you. And I said in my other video, I think a lot of people focus on dice, and at the same time, when they lose, they focus on situations that went bad for them. And I think it's important. The reason you kind of have to ignore some things is I acknowledge when people tell me, oh, this was bad, it really spun there. But in the back of my head, and sometimes I say it, I'm like, yeah, but this went really good for you, and you would have been screwed if it went bad. Like, yes, I still won in the end, but this could have went really bad for you, and it just didn't happen to. So, bad things happen to both players. Sometimes it sucks a lot. I think a big one is like dispelling spells where somebody beats 6 dice with a 4. And it's really, the odds aren't even that crazy. I think I don't even know what that is. Maybe it's 20 some percent. Maybe it's a little less. I think it's 20 some percent. That's not crazy at all. 1% things aren't that crazy. So, but you have to mentally be able to get past it. And sometimes it'll stick with you afterwards. Oh, I failed this leadership 10 check on the last turn, blah, blah, blah. But especially during the games and early on, you really got to be like stone cold. At least I try to be. I try not to really show too many emotions of dice rollings, whether good or bad. And you could joke around, it's like, oh, I'm definitely more playful with them. Like, oh my God, he failed me. Like if Gus dies, I'm like, oh, you killed Gus. Or I'll say that's unfortunate. But anyway, I think you really do got to get mentally strong. But I'm pretty good about that. In fact, I'm probably the opposite. When things are going well, I probably am more likely to make mistakes because I think it doesn't matter. And against good players, you really got to put the grind on them, because I've seen games just swing back the other way. Something goes really well turn 1, you kill something that's worth a lot of points, and then they still beat you, and you're like, oh, where did I go wrong? And the last one I want to talk about with the don't being afraid to fail and practicing is playing all matchups. I think personally, when it comes to getting better for ETC and stuff like that, you really have to be willing to play all matchups because, or at least test them. No one likes to lose. And I think in a game where it is skewed and some matchups are a little bit lopsided or boring, you tend to avoid him. You're like, if somebody came to me and be like, you want to play my Dwarf Gunline? I'd probably be like, oh, no, absolutely not. I'll pass. But at the same time, you don't know until you play it if you're good against it or not. And maybe your army is good against it and you just don't want to play it because you think it's boring. But if you are really trying to go for something like ETC and really know how to do a pairing matrix and really know how to play matchups, you should in fact seek out games versus armies that you're not good against or you're not well versed in. Sorry. Because this kind of takes it back to the rules knowledge. The more you play against something, the more you know, so you can't be caught off guard. But also just knowing how the matchup goes, so when you play somebody, if there's a chance, I'll give you an example, right? If you go, first off, there's a lot of armies, there's a lot of different kinds of lists, and most people aren't playing hundreds of games before ATC, even the best players, other than a few. So even some of the top players might go into a matchup and not be like 100% familiar with it. They might have only played it a couple times, if not less, if not once. And so you having that matchup knowledge might actually give you an edge. And when I say play all matchups, not only do I think you should play all armies and just give it a try against them, but also play different players. I can guarantee you, my most games played against Travis's Demons, because he plays Demons and he lives near me, and we're best friends and stuff, so he comes over and we play. But I can't base all my Demon knowledge on playing Travis. He's a little bit more defensive than some other Demon players is. So I can't expect everybody to play like him. So you got to play different people. So if I said today, and I should do this more, you know what? I haven't really played much ID lately. And almost maybe it's back on my mind, scared to play ID. I should go seek out 3 or 4 ID players that I know and try to get a practice game in. See how they play. See if the match is good or bad. You might lose every game. And you know what? It probably made you stronger for it. Because you either know about it when you have to play it again and know how to play the matchup better, or you'll avoid it in pairings and you'll know you should avoid it instead of just being like, I don't know. And that's the problem with, not the problem, but that's the thing about team events is you can knowingly avoid a lot of matchups, even if you just think it's bad, even if it's not actually bad. So sometimes you might be putting a matchup as a yellow or an orange or something bad, and in reality, you're fine. You just keep avoiding it for no reason because you haven't played it before and you think it's bad. So I would say, again, this video was a lot about me, but I think these points can be made for a lot of people, is if I want to get better, I need to really play more games, be willing to play versus all types of armies to, spread my I haven't played much against ID. I've never played new VS, that kind of thing. And when I'm playing those games, I need to actively think through some aspects of the game more. I think I did a really good job thinking through deployment more this tournament. I think in 1 or 2 of the games, they did a good job about playing the 6-turn game and not the have to win it on turn 2 game. I still need to get a little bit better about the think through the moves thing. I think that one, I just need a mental note to say, hey, right after, right when you're about to charge, think about where you're going to actually put your models and think farther than just, it's easy to say, oh, I want to clip here so one model gets in and this model doesn't. But sometimes there's a little more nuance, like being within 1 inch of somebody, putting your champion somewhere. I mean, hell, putting your, you could do pre-moves in turn 1 to prep for turn 2 charges by putting your champion in a certain spot in the unit so that, he can block stuff. These are the little things that, once you get down, and if you're a newer player, you're not that experienced, this is like next level stuff. This is like after you're pretty good at the other things. But, I need to slow it down and really take the time to make it happen. without being a slow player, like a slow playing. So, again, hopefully you enjoy this video. Hopefully you enjoy this talk. I really enjoy people to talk about the game, play the game. Really, on the rules part, that whole spiel about taking responsibility and learning the rules, I really do believe that. And I think playing with integrity, I think it helps you. I think it makes you a better player. I don't think there's anything to gain from letting your opponents just cheat themselves immensely all the time. If they play badly, that's one thing. I will 100%. I do not tell people like, oh, you should have fled charge here, blah blah blah. But I think there is a certain level of integrity, especially like if you see somebody's trying to do something and it's not possible. Sometimes it depends. Depends. I probably give a little bit more away than I should, but sometimes I feel like it's necessary. It's like you don't want to win because somebody just was like, I don't know, didn't know anything. So, thanks for listening, and have a good night.